Yep, you did it. Perfect.
Okay, good deal. All righty. Well, I just want to say thank you to everyone here for being able to kind of jump in at the last minute. I do apologize about that. So I'm going to kind of give you a little rundown about why we're here and why this was kind of a last minute thing. And then we're going to try to reach out and get some feedback from you guys about, how to maybe move forward. So essentially what happened is this. In terms of administration of a remote WIDA access for this year, up to this point, WIDA had not said that it was like a hard no, but certainly had not said that it was really on the radar either. So late last week, we got an email that essentially said, we're considering it. And we're going to, we'll stop there. It's on the consideration page. We'd like to meet with everybody basically we're going to get all the states together either through the subcommittees or through a one LEA webinar. And we're going to talk about kind of what this might look like. That happened on Tuesday of this week. We met with some people at the state in assessment accountability yesterday to kind of get get their take or kind of give them an idea of what was going on and kind of what WIDA was saying about what this would look like and what our responsibilities would be. And then based on that conversation, we felt it appropriate to go ahead and reach out to the biggest, kind of chunk of districts in the state. You guys together, all told, represent probably 75 or 80% of the ELs in the state, to kind of get your feelings about what your part in this would be and whether or not, and kind of how feasible you think this might be. And that's today. And then by tomorrow, I have to get a state level response to WIDA, kind of dictating gauging our level of interest and enthusiasm for this project. So this all, basically we had a week time frame, from initially being told that this is what we need to do to we need a final word. So that's kind of why I had to, that's why our time frames are kind of abbreviated. So I do apologize about that, but it was kind of the hand that was dealt to us by WIDA. So now does anyone have any questions about that before we kind of move forward? Nope. Okay. So essentially here's the pitch. WIDA, and this was Tuesday with Gary Cook, he kind of presented it in a can we and should we framework. So he started with the can we, in that moving off of or kind of drawing from the May guidance that came out this year, a fine-tooth reading of that guidance is that technically it was only applicable to 2019-2020. So anything moving forward in, the guidance specifically, if you're going to interpret it as being specifically appropriate to 2019-2020, moving forward into 2020-2021, we will be WIDA testing. And that's what we're operating from right now, is that no matter what, we will be administering the WIDA test. Given that assumption that we will be testing, and knowing that so many districts are starting off the year in remote learning situations, and there's a very strong chance that districts will still be in a remote learning situation come January, what if the expectation is to test, can we go ahead and, is a remote screener an option? And their take on it is that it's technically possible. What WIDA is considering doing is taking essentially a retired, basically building an access assessment out of retired questions, and then making it available online only in the top tiers of writing and speaking. So it would have a limited number of students that could take. It's already making the way the test is structured. It's limited because it's only online. There's no paper option for writing, and it's only at tier BC for writing and speaking. So it's already kind of constrained in how it would need to be administered. And beyond that, there would come down to essentially the districts to say, all right, can you actually administer this? And that's on you guys to say, can you provide enough laptops to all the kids that are in a remote learning situation that have been loaded up, preloaded up with the appropriate software to give a student access? Do you have the IT infrastructure to help out with problems that would pop up in the administration? Do you have enough proctors to work with a student, kind of one-on-one? Because I don't know. I suppose you could set up something where maybe 4 or 5 kids or 10 kiddos would be doing this remotely at one time, and have everyone kind of on a different Zoom window to kind of help administer the test, maybe. But that would be, making sure this actually happened would be 98% on the districts. WIDA would have very limited ability to provide you any technical assistance, because they're essentially providing you the assessment themselves, or the assessment itself, and saying however you choose to get it administered is really on you. We could provide help in terms of just maybe thinking through some of the logistical problems, but there's going to be so many different levels of resource at the district level, and how this would actually have to come. It would be largely a district level plan to make sure, to kind of ensure that would be able to be administered. On the backside of that, the data that would be generated from this would be questionable on how valid it would be, right? You'd really make some assumptions on, how well across the board the test was proctored, who was taking it, were, external, supplemental things being used to kind of help a student through the test, whatever. There could be, dozens of issues in this. Equity in terms of testing location. How many kids have a test with a younger brother and a younger sister fighting in the other room? Or, can the district ensure that the Wi-Fi, or that the district laptop that they provided the student, is every one of those going to have a hotspot to make sure that the Wi-Fi or the wireless connection is solid? There's a reason why most online testing takes place on hardwired traditional PCs, because you have a more stable internet connection. It's just more stable than Wi-Fi. But you probably couldn't do that with a remote administration of this. So given that, we just basically taken the stance that, yes, this will generate data, but this data should not be used for any kind of accountability purpose. And unless there was a really solid procedure set in place by the state, it shouldn't be used for exit determinations either. So that would be a question that we would have to discuss and say, look, if we did want to move forward with this, it would, on its face, it would primarily be to generate, or to be able to say, look, within ESSA that is requiring us to test our kiddos, we did that. Now, outside of what if we're looking at the assessment as a compliance component, that's what this is giving us as just kind of on face value. If we just did it today, it's saying that we can tell USDE we complied with Title I requirements to administer an English language proficiency assessment to all of our state ELs within reason, who we could. We gave every option to do it. But from an assessment kind of looked at within the lens of, it's meant to drive instruction, or it's meant to, allow us to know who we can exit out of EL status, maybe not so much. All right, we would have to decide, are there external criteria at the district level that we would say may or may not justify an exit from EL status? But that creates a whole other host of issues in the accountability reporting system that we would have to address as well. So that's kind of the current situation. So I'd like to kind of get your feelings on knowing that, and knowing what the expectation for you would be. And understand too, that this is coming from, we can't know what's going to be going on come January 1. No one knows what our case count's going to do. No one knows, where we might see hotspots erupt in the state. No one knows that. We're assuming that as of right now, if you had to do this, right now, knowing that you have as many kids potentially in remote instruction situations, and you had to go ahead and administer a remote screen or a remote access, what would be your concerns? And do you think that it would be feasible for your district? And I kind of I'd kind of like to hear from everybody.
I don't think, my concerns would be, number one, personnel. I do not have the personnel to be able to do that, you know, in a secure environment or to monitor testing. So that's a huge concern. We are giving out a lot and we're working on distributing a lot of hotspots, but they are not very strong signals. And I do not think they would, I mean, I think there would be so much disruption in testing go down at somebody's home because of the hotspots that I don't think we could guarantee the connectivity part.
Mm-hmm.
And we have mostly in elementary given out iPads. You know, so as far as if the test could work on iPads, we'd have a fighting chance of having the device. But again, we have the hotspot issue. So those are the big ones on my radar right now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and
Okay.
there's the test integrity issue. I mean, if you're at home and you've got an older, I mean, there's just all, I just don't, I think, Dan, you said every single thing you in your speech to us that is a reason not to do it. If we can do it, if we can figure out, if they'll waive it, our requirement to do it, I just don't see why we would invest any energy in it.
So, yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, no one is, right now, the general consensus is that no one is expecting USDE to waive the actual requirement to test. You know, that we will still, you know, from SDE's perspective, we're still looking at this as we're moving forward with OSTP testing and we're moving forward with WIDA testing. You know, and this is all speculation, 100%. So please take this as what it is. But where the speculation is that we're going to get a waiver is in what we have to do from an accountability perspective with the data that we generate from the OSTPs and the WIDAs that we administer. So, you know, kind of the idea where, you know, you go from the big A kind of accountability assessment to the small A assessment for the purposes of just kind of deriving student data for, you know, programming decisions. You know, that's where that's kind of where we're, you know, speculating that we're going to end up going. But again, we don't know. So this is kind of one of those, WIDA is kind of stepping out there and saying, okay, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what allowances we're going to have, but we need to talk to the members of our consortium and say, look, this is what we can do. If the members of the consortium talk to their districts, look at the viability of this, and they come back to us and say, you know, look, we just don't think, given the technical constraints, given the time frame and the personnel, the time frame constraints and the personnel constraints the districts are working with, we just don't see this as feasible. Then I think that they in some ways are covered, right? I mean, they did their due diligence to kind of step out there and say, look, we're dealing with an unprecedented situation. We have a whole bunch of kids that, you know, are in a situation where they can't test face to face the way the test was designed. We put out there a potential, you know, solution to that you know, was just deemed to be technically impossible to justify, the results of which would not justify necessarily the cost and the, you know, the maybe inactionable data that we get out of it. But we tried. And I think that's kind of where they are right now. And that's why we're having conversations like this, just to kind of feel out what's reasonable. All right, knowing full well, coming from the perspective that we are going to need, we do all understand that we will need to administer the access test. It's just what's it going to look like in our district, given what we're working with. Does that make sense?
So one of the things I'm concerned about is if we don't know that we'll get a waiver on the access test from the feds, meaning we're going to have to give it in some form, in person or remote, and we say, yeah, the remote thing sounds like too much, then are we putting ourselves in a corner, regardless of if our schools are open or not, to figure out a way to do it in person? So I'm concerned to say no. The remote sounds like a lot, yes, but at the same time, I like to have a plan B in my pocket if my plan A of being safe in person is not an option. Can you clarify that, Dan, on our choices?
Unfortunately not. So we got to the point where they said, look, you know, this is, we'll kind of put together kind of if this is possible. And that's where they stopped completely. They said, you know, they kind of got to the point where they said, theoretically, could we do this? And then they said, now we're going to put it to the consortium. Any further that they want to go on this is now driving up costs and pulling people off of other projects to kind of make this happen. So I can't tell you I can't tell you what, because we don't know if we opt not to do this, if there's going to be another consequence. I would assume that, if districts across the consortium and states across the consortium just say, look, we just don't see this as feasible. I don't necessarily know that USDE is going to be able to, what are they going to do? At the end of the day, if kids don't test, they don't test. And if kids don't, and if a significant number of kids don't test, it becomes more and more difficult to require the states to implement accountability, in a way that assumes that the pandemic isn't occurring. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. For our district in Oklahoma City, by Monday, all the students will have a Chromebook. And so we'll find out next week how well the hotspots are working. But my problem would be like trying to test one-on-one. The sizes of our schools, per the ratio of our teachers, I don't think we can get it done if it's one by one. If we can do large groups, like if one ELL teacher can test 20 kids at a time or 30 kids at a time, it might be something that we can do, but one-on-one, it's just no way. They will never finish.
Hey, Dan, this is Jean. I say Jennifer, but it's Jean. So, no, because I've been watching my kids do college online, and there's multiple kids because she's got friends and they're all taking it at the same time. So there's one teacher and they still have 120 kids up there. If it could be set up that way where you just flip between screens, and you're not seeing the kid every single second, but you're able to go through every 5 minutes or 3 minutes. You can actually do faster than 5. And you flip through and you see the kid, because what they do is they have them take a picture of the area. They make them have their sound on, all those safety precautions. All we could do is the best we could do for compliance. But then you can test more. But one-on-one, I think Broken Arrow would even have a hard time finding that many teachers to do one-on-one. But if we could test, 25 on one, we could probably get it done,
Yeah, and I have no idea what each individual local district has access to be able to do. Have you tried, kind of with your distance ed last year, did any of your teachers or does any of your platforms allow kind of exactly what you're talking about, getting 20, even 15 kids in the same room and then allowing one proctor to kind of talk to everybody at once and administer something like this?
But if it's done virtually, like we wouldn't have them all in the same room, like just like we can see each other, like you can't see me, but I can see you, right? Mm-hmm. They put their computer back so far, like they have to have it, of course, they're working on it, but they, and you can see their face. They're not allowed to look at anybody to the left or right for a long period of time. They have to work on the computer, you know what I mean? So you're watching them take the test is really what you're doing to ensure that they're not cheating or talking to their brother or their mom or why they're taking it, but you're not really helping them. So for a first grader, that could be incredibly hard because, if they're having problems accessing the test or whatever, that's where you come into all kinds of problems. An older kid, high school, middle school, it's probably going to be more doable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the assessment needs a proctor. You wouldn't take a standard access assessment and put 10 kids in a computer lab and just hit go and be done with it and just check them in 2 hours. They're going to need specific instructions on how to move forward through the test, what buttons to click, and I assume, and these were questions that we asked yesterday on Tuesday in the meeting, is the access going to be developed in a way that allows the proctor to kind of move a student forward on their machine. And that was a big, that would require significant more development in the test. Maybe it's possible, maybe it's not, kind of thing. So, we're pushing on, that's why we're kind of putting it to you guys to a certain extent, saying, well, what do you think is feasible? Yeah. In this, yeah, it depends on how much control then the district proctor has over what that kiddo is seeing on their screen on a district laptop, right? And can they kind of take direct control and move screens forward, read directions all at once, and kind of monitor to make sure kids are doing what they need to do. I don't know what your local systems are like, or if you've even tried something like that, to see if it could be a thing.
Hey, Dan, this is Christy. I agree with the rest of the team in that we're going to have a really hard time with personnel, I feel like. And we are, we're one of the rogue districts. We're in person right now. So we've got about 80% of our kids attending class at school. So I only have about 7 to 9 remote screeners that I have to even try to give. And we're going to just, instead of doing that, bring them up to our administration building and do them in a one-on-one session. But so I don't have the machines. We don't have enough machines for our elementary to have all of them to have one online. We're set up to where if we have to put a whole school at home for a quarantine, we can set that school up, but not to go 12,000 elementary kids have their own device. No. So that's going to be a real problem for us for sure.
Okay. Laura, you had said something in the chat. Let me check that back.
Okay, sorry, I'm trying to get my daughter in the car. Basically, we've got the infrastructure, we've got one-to-one Chromebooks, and over 10,000 hotspots, so we think we're good on that so far. My concern is that if for whatever reason we still are distanced in the spring and we have to figure out a way to test, I'm super concerned then about trying to figure out a safe way to bring people in person. Then I am concerned about figuring out the infrastructure to do remote. So again, it's about having that plan B for safety. Because I know even like Metro Nashville, even though they're doing distance learning, they are bringing people in to do the live WIDA screener by appointment. I don't want to be in a situation where I have to figure out how to bring people in live by appointment to do access. To me, that's worse than the remote access.
Okay. So your take on it is that you'd rather keep it in your pocket as a, if we have to test, you'd rather have the remote option than try to figure out how to get all your kids in, kind of one by one or in small groups to test.
But
Absolutely.
Then as a statewide directive, though, then it would have to be optional because we can't. I mean, we can't. We've distributed hotspots, and they won't even really carry Canvas or Seesaw, our distance learning platforms. We're having problems all over the place with virtual learning because of those hotspots. They're not working like they should. So it would have to be, for those of us who don't have the capacity to do it, we're going to have some options, Dan. I mean, we're doing face-to-face screeners right now. We've developed a protocol. They're coming up one by one to screen. It's taking for absolute ever because we don't want to remote screen them, and if we don't have to, if the parents are willing to bring the student up. But I mean, there's no way we can do that. For access testing, I can't even wrap my mind around how we could do it.
And just to everyone, kind of, I don't want to hit the panic button. I hope I'm not hitting anyone's panic button. Is really, but just understand that this is, all potential. Even if Oklahoma was just, we had this conversation, and everyone was like, "This is exactly what I want to do." We totally need the option. If this is a consortium-wide decision. All 30 some odd states and territories that are in WIDA are having the same conversation right now. And even if 2 or 3 of them are just totally gung-ho on this and 25 aren't, WIDA will take that under consideration, and ultimately their executive committee will decide whether or not, based on this state level feedback, on whether to move forward. You know, and if we do move forward, what, you know, kind of what WIDA how WIDA has kind of presented this is that if we do move forward, this will be one option for testing. We, you know, as a consortium, we will provide you the ability to buy paper if that's what your district wants, the ability to test online and or test online and face-to-face, and the ability to test remotely if you choose to use it. So even if they did move forward, you know, you might have states that were totally against this, saying, yeah, we just don't see a reason to do this. And even though the option is there, like not to do it, you know, for their own internal reasons. Maybe they don't want, their districts don't think they can do it. They don't see any, benefit to the data. They just opt not to. So just understand kind of that's where this has come. That's kind of where we are in this. Does that make sense?
My issue with this is the fact that the result will not be valid for exit. So when you think about the cost of diminishing return, I really don't see the feasibility of having to go to that to give the test, and then we know for sure that the results really not valid. So if it's not valid to be tested out, even to design instruction, that you're still gonna have that doubt whether the data is actually useful. So in this case, I would rather if the state could actually suggest that district allow us to bring the student in the building. There are ways to this. We can do social distancing and wearing masks. They can take the test, of course. I think that would be a better solution. And also, I'm interested in knowing what the state will be doing for the OSTP. So whatever modality that they're going to use to administer the OSTP, then we will use the same modality. So if they are not going to administer the OSTP, then I would opt to just stay away from trying. Because if they're not gonna do the OSTP, then this year we had the privilege of at least having some data is because we were able to administer the test before we went on spring break. Because had we not, that's why if we didn't finish, if we had not had a chance to finish, we would not have had any data just for the same as the OSTP. So the validity is a problem. It's not the capacity aside, but the validity is a problem for me.
Did I hear you say, Dan, that the only reason we do this would be to check the ESSA box?
Well, that as it is right now, like if we just took it at face value at this moment right now and said we're just gonna do this to generate X data based off of this remote administration, stopping there checks the ESSA box. We tested as many kids as we could and in many different learning environments as we could. You know, that's what we did, period. This set of data right here, where we tested kids face to face, or, you know, we can use that for potential exit. We can use that for exit determinations. We're good to go. That was administered the way that we wanted to. These kids over here that assessed just remotely, we can't do it then. Now, if we wanted to go further as a state and say, look, okay, we had a remote administration for these particular kids. We have a WIDA score, probably not valid enough to justify exiting out that student on that score alone, but maybe we develop some sort of hybrid with similar categories to the band exit, you know, to where if we had a composite score of, you know, this is all just arbitrary, but a hybrid score or a remote access score of 4.5 or above, plus you had, you know, an OSTP requirement, plus you had a grade requirement, something along those lines that at least paints a better picture of where the student is and would justify exit. Theoretically, this is all speculation. Please remember that. But, you know, checking the exit box is kind of where we are right now. And I think what WIDA really wants to address, where we chose to, if we choose to move forward with this, if the rest of the consortium deems that, or wants this as an option, and we as executive committee agrees that it should be an option, we have it there, then we would have a conversation about, okay, now how would we most appropriately use the data? Or are we gonna move forward as a state doing this? Does that make sense?
for me, it makes sense if we're gonna go remote with the OSTP, then if we're gonna use the remote modality for the OSTP or any other state test, then we'll pretty much will go ahead and do the same. So do you have any idea whether the state would allow the OSTP to be administered remotely?
The last I heard was that it wasn't a feasible option, but then again, they said the same thing about WIDA. So, or the general consensus was that there was like, remote is not really on the table, especially given the fact that our window opens in 4 months. It's not really a thing. And then all of a sudden it was a thing. Then all of a sudden it's like, well, now we're having a conversation about it. So I'm going to say that, like anything else in this particular time frame, it isn't until it is.
Yeah, I can see a scenario even though we're delivering instruction remotely, but for testing, at least for the testing, they would create a way that district could bring students, for a number of students to the building where they can safely, test them. For the OSTP, I'm thinking. So I think that same thing can happen with the testing as well. So we just need to make sure that they don't just ignore us. If they're going to go the extra mile to test the OSTP, so they should be willing to make the same sacrifice for the WIDA, so that we're not just, we don't want to be left behind in any sacrifice they're going to make to administer the OSTP. Let's be included in that planning.
And I think that, and I think that would, I don't have any concerns with that. I don't feel like we're being left off the table or anything like that. There's enough, we understand what needs to be done. We understand the rules. We understand kind of, what this needs to look like. So, and they're functionally two separate systems. So, I think the expectations would be the same for both. Kind of so goes one, as goes one, so goes the other kind of thing. Makes sense.
And Dan, that's where part of my concern is also time-wise. So yeah, we have 4 months till we start WIDA testing. If we don't keep this as an option now, we lose that time to indicate interest in that readiness. Whereas OSTP might be decided at some point later. So I'm also thinking about WIDA needing to be able to have something ready for us, whether we do it or not.
Mm-hmm. I agree. But I can't control. None of the consortium states have any say in this. It's going to be a collective decision. Or they're going to look at the collected data and then make a call based on what they see, and hopefully that call will come pretty quick, and they'll be able to put out. But as soon as they say, look, this is, we are going to move forward or we're not, at least we know at that point, how, which direction to go in. But like I said, that's why we're having the conversation, so we can generate the feedback, and then wherever the feedback takes us is where it takes us.
Well, agreed, and that's why I'm concerned about saying no now, so that they would be like, oh, okay, then we won't, with that feedback and other feedback, we might not pursue the development, just at least giving them a timeline for development. And yes, I'm sorry, I'll stop talking now. I'm going back on mute.
No, you're good. That's literally why we're having the conversation, so don't feel bad about it.
Dan, one of the concerns I have is if we have kids come into the buildings is transportation. If we were to, we had thought about having parents bring students so we could do the regular screener, but then transportation became one of the problems. Who's going to bring the kids to the buildings? Parents work. Who's going to transport them, and for them to take the WIDA in their building? So yeah, maybe it is remote access might be something to look forward to if we could do it in bigger groups than just one-on-one. Transportation will be a problem to come in for parents, I think. Or as a district, do we have to provide buses or?
Did a district do some of one and some of the other?
We did.
Because we like right now we have elementary coming back in person. We're not having secondary back in person yet. So I could see us being in a situation too where it's not the whole district at the same time. Where
That's
we
exactly,
might remote
that's exactly what I was about to say.
live
Yeah.
for other, and so in that case it would be a good option because then you would just have more things to work with if you could mix and match to what meets your needs. So I
Janet,
understand
that's
that would
exactly,
impact like what scores count. You know, some students can exit, some students can't. But is that better? Is that
Yes.
better anyway to give some provide flexibility for districts?
I like that. That's what we're doing right now at the WIDA screener. We're trying to face as many as we can that's safe, and the ones that we can't, we'll use the remote screener, knowing that, you know, that's not the best placement data. And I think that maybe a hybrid model is best. It's hard to say right now, honestly.
And I mean, then you get scores as a district, it's mixed up. So not all scores are the same, but for us, at least, it's still just one data point for how we determine how best to serve students. And so it's still valuable information because we don't base all of our decisions on that one data point.
Okay. So I just want to jump back into the chat real quick, just kind of going back up to the top. And Laura had initially asked, is there an option for no test? And we had talked about that before. As of right now, there's not. USDE, I would be very surprised if USDE issued guidance this close to the election, honestly. I mean, I just don't know that that's going to be a thing. So I think that we're probably going to be working for, you know, that's why we're operating under the assumption that we will administer tests. So what's the tech connection for Chromebooks independently to WIDA? I have absolutely no idea. I don't, you know, generally speaking, the Insight portal needs to be installed on the local machines. So I am assuming that Chromebooks are a pretty big part of that in multiple districts. I know kids did test on Chromebooks last year. I have no idea what that looks like from kind of more of an enterprise administration where the Chromebooks are no longer on a local network, you know, because there are issues with that. So again, these are all things that are going to need to be kind of plowed through. If we do elect to move forward with this, there's going to be a lot of, you know, tech issues on the local side to make sure that whatever your distribution is of technology, that it's going to be solid enough to get this done. And then lastly, remote is only for higher tiers where the implications for tier A. You know, what Gary said in the webinar, let me go back up to my notes here. Yeah, they're simply not going to be available. So they just won't be there. The test won't be basically the test won't be adaptive. You know, it'll only be available to those kiddos that are kind of within striking range of exit. It's not going to be for your lower tier testers, which, you know, I mean, might somewhat help from a proctor point of view, where you'll have, you know, kind of higher level students taking the test, and you maybe not have as many linguistic issues with administration potentially. For whatever reason, that's how they opted to move forward with this. So Laura said, tentatively we have infrastructure to do remote access. I can see it being proctored by Zoom, by CCS. I'm not sure what that is, Laura.
Council for Great City Schools. Sorry, it's other large urban districts. So that's like Metro Nashville walked us through their protocols for in-person screener, and it's intense. That's where I'm seeing, like, if other large districts have figured out some ways to do it, that's great. I still don't want to.
Yeah, I feel you. I mean, okay. And then your take that if you'd rather you'd want the remote as a potential option if come January we need it, basically.
Correct.
Okay. Another thing from Erica, another thing to consider, some families may not have electricity to power up the devices. That is a legitimate concern. Shamika had said, I'm in a rural district and I'm worried about reliable connectivity, even if my students have the devices. and in agreement with Dr. Lene about, kind of OSTP, if we're going to go one on whatever way we choose to go, they're tied together essentially. Yeah, rural connectivity is a major concern, especially, anyone that's been in any kind of spent any time in rural Oklahoma and tried to get Wi-Fi signal. It can be a very, very dicey, in the matter of 10 feet this way, you get something sometimes, and 20 feet that way, you never do, kind of thing. So I think that is definitely something to be considered, that, while most of numerically, most of our ELs are in, the two major metro areas, Lawton, Enid, and, it does, a big chunk, probably 20% are served in all those districts that, are kind of where Shamika is, where their Wi-Fi is not consistent. And in that case is that, then we kind of have a question, well, how many kids are doing remote education out there? And there's a whole lot of variables there. So from Tanya said that Lawton's IT said, if it's not running off our servers, then we should be able to handle it. But student Wi-Fi would be a concern. Our hotspots would work fine. Our elementary virtual students are now assigned to 2 schools only, and trying to bring all the EL virtual students in for face-to-face could be difficult for just 2 counselors to handle. So remote testing would help. Okay. Do you think there could be consideration for a modified access test similar to a screener that isn't as intense as the typical access? Maybe one that would be easier to give virtually. I would say that probably not, in as much as that WIDA, you gotta remember that, to me, and this is my impression, so I'm not trying to put words in WIDA's mouth here. This is just my impression that WIDA is trying to fundamentally check the access box first in terms of ESSA compliance. So they have every incentive to keep the remote access assessment as close as possible to a traditional access assessment. I don't know that they are, when they're already dealing with validity concerns with how it's going to be administered. I don't think that they have much desire to kind of scale it back, so to speak, in any way to make it potentially easier for remote administration. I think they're trying to, at least on paper, say, look, we used a real access test. We used, we used former questions that were vetted. We kept it as in line as possible to the actual test. Now our validity concerns are really more on the administrative side. We can't guarantee this, we can't guarantee this, we can't, Wi-Fi and test environment and all these other things, we can't guarantee that. But what we can guarantee is that the test in and of itself is aligned, is a former access test. It is a realistic, assessment under perfect conditions of what that student's English language proficiency would be. So I'd say they probably would not be interested in that, but I can always throw it out there. One way I would remote test is if we have, only way I would remote test is if we have to, because of ESSA funding. Bad data, poor connectivity, little to no test integrity makes it a big why for me. We'll suck up lots of instructional resources for little to no return. I will say, Mary, that that is a pretty good summary of some of the comments that that other states provided in our standard subcommittee meeting on Tuesday. That was a big part of it. Given the fact that the data are sketchy, given the fact that we don't necessarily know what this is going to look like, there's a lot of people kind of shake. It's like, well, what's the benefit? And that's really going to be on the states, right? I mean, that's going to be on, if we do choose to move forward with this, what realistic and fair process can we set up to maybe use this data in a way that makes it more valuable? But then again, those are conversations that we'll have to have as we move forward. So I know we're about 10 minutes away here from 4 o'clock, and I don't want to keep you guys too long. So just so I can get a general sense, I mean, the general sense is that this is pretty that we're not super excited. No one seems really super excited about doing this, but and just given for all the reasons we just said, not 100% sure if the personnel and the technology is going to be available to make it work. Except, but then again, it might be an option, or it might be good to keep it on the table you know, if you know, we do start in January and we're still distance learning and we need to do something, it would be nice to have this as an option. So I can maybe better answer the questions that WIDA asked us. Can we answer any of the ifs? I would do this kind of like fill out the sentence like, I would be okay with this if, you know, and not from like, you know what you basically know at this point what your district's capacity to do this would be. But from a WIDA and state perspective, if you could fill out the question, I would be okay with moving forward with this if X, Y, or Z. What would those ifs be for you? Oh, somebody's got something.
Hey, Dan, if I can't see this happening for us unless you guys made it a requirement, I'm going to make this work. But it is not going to be easy if all of a sudden we had to go remote, especially if we are still with our options that we currently have, and I still have 80% of my kids attending in school. You know.
Okay. Gotcha. That's fair. I mean, again, I'm going to qualify this as this. I'm only doing this to gather information. You know, I'm not saying at all this will happen. You know, Oklahoma is one of the smaller members of the consortium. I don't know how much weight we actually hold. I'm just, you know, I'm trying to get the best idea of our ability to do this as a state, and you guys are the best measure of that.
I think for Broken Arrow, the would be doing it multiple people at one time. We can push out the testing site, whatever it is, you know, like all Chromebooks do all that. Everything is fine. It's just, you know, the manpower of getting them all tested one-on-one would be, be really hard.
So right now,
just ask a clarifying question real quick, because my internet, I don't know if it's my internet or if everyone is hearing like Christy sounds very like that.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding. The remote access would be only for the kids who are virtual all year, or if our district went all virtual, we would still have a paper access to give? Is this in replace of paper access?
No, this isn't and thanks for clarifying. This is in addition to the current options for, well, how we just said this would work is that if they choose to move forward, if they elect to move forward with this,
I can't hear you.
Okay.
I don't know.
Dan. Jennifer, come into my office. I can hear.
Do you know how long it took me to figure out why my name was on the screen twice, by the way? Okay, I'll come in there.
Okay, I'll wait to answer the question until you get with Jean.
2 seconds.
Okay. All right. And Jean, while Jennifer's on her way over there, your if was if multiple people could test at once, or so, but you know, that's more of a local decision. Are you saying if the test could be designed in a way that allowed a proctor to more easily kind of administer a test to multiple people at once? Or
yeah, like we just need to make sure if it's distance, you know, if they're doing that at home, that they have a way that we can proctor multiple, just like a college would give a test to their class. They're proctor, you know, 100 kids at a time. I mean, we wouldn't need 100, but I'm just saying one-on-one is going to be really rough.
Yeah, and that was just an example. I mean,
yeah,
not having any idea about what your local situation looks like in terms of virtual delivery, you know, some districts have probably already done this, have already, you know, had a teacher deliver an assessment to, you know, 25 kids in a class and not had any issues with it. Others haven't even broached the subject yet. So okay. All right. And Jennifer, are you with Jean now?
I'm in here, yes.
Okay, perfect. So this would be in addition to the current versions of WIDA. It basically just gives a flexibility to those districts that have kids that are in a remote learning situation that still need to assess. So right now, essentially what's going to happen is that, if your district, we're still expecting all kids to assess, we're going to move forward with potential. If you're, I don't know, coronavirus goes crazy in the state and most districts go 100% virtual, then the expectation, and we'll assume the expectation is then that you schedule appointments for those kids that can come in and test, to go in and test for both OSTP and access. That's what you do. Any kids that can't, they just don't test. They just don't participate this year. But if this option is there, then you have the remote screen, or you have the remote access option that you can potentially implement to get more kids tested. Make sense?
Well, since it is not an either
Yes.
or, we're still gonna have the other option, then it's safe to say yes. You can go ahead and give them something to work on.
Yeah. Okay. So, Dr. Linnae, for you, you'd be more comfortable if one thing or another?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else want to kind of throw something out there?
Okay, I put my ifs in the chat, but basically I said, if we're still required to give the test and if we're still in distance learning, then like I said, I want it available. And then I said, either way, whether we do this or have to figure out how to bring people in if we're not in person, we need grace on participation, because either way, we won't get near 100% participation.
Yeah, and no one is expecting that. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we're having this conversation right now, is because if things stay the same, we know full well that, the number, our number of tested students is going to take a huge nosedive. I mean, no one is doubting that. And, the grace component, that's what we talked about before. We're assuming, and this is what we're assuming right now, is that USDE will allow a similar flexibility that they did with accountability measurements from 2019, 2020. We'll have something similar for 2020, 2021. And that's where you'd see kind of the grace. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree completely with Laura. I just said it shorter and meaner in the chat. Sorry.
Let me say.
No harm. I just got home and somebody put sliced cheese all over the side of my husband's truck, so I was a little distracted.
Sliced cheese?
Yeah, like we've got, somebody also put, no offense, not making a political statement, but somebody put Trump bumper stickers on his truck like a few weeks ago, even though we don't support him. We cleaned those off. Now people have sliced cheese on the side of his truck. I'm like, okay, we need to get some cameras. I don't know what's going on. Okay, random, sorry.
That is such an odd form of vandalism.
It really is.
That is just weird.
I mean, how wasteful of cheese.
I know.
No,
it was a good quality
Toilet paper,
cheese.
not cheese.
A ton of good sliced cheese melting on the side of my husband's truck.
I'm sorry, Laura. That's just absolutely ridiculous. Like, we don't have enough going on.
Coronavirus. What you
Really?
gonna say?
Laura, I've been driving. Did you say someone put sliced cheese on your husband's truck? Did I really hear that?
Yeah, you really did just hear me say that, Chris. I'll take pictures. I'll share later.
Oh, Lord. Okay.
I guess somebody's gonna have to move their cheese.
All right. And okay. Just want to make sure there was no other questions in the chat that we needed to address real quick. Okay. And Shamika had asked, how many attempts to test should we try before we count them absent for testing? That will have to come later, Shamika. I don't know that there's an actual, we're in a kind of an unprecedented situation right now. So I don't know that we have formal guidance around that yet. I'd have to check to see if assessment has anything that they've already had established for OSTP. Julie, used to Oreo cars. Not cool, man. If you're gonna do that, use the cheap, Best Choice cookies. Don't use the real Oreos. Those are for eating. All right. All right. Dr. Lene, take care. Appreciate you joining us. And Julie, you had asked if USD is offering any flexibility. We kind of covered that a little bit earlier, but right now, no. I would be very surprised if we got any formal guidance out of USDE this close to the election. I would just don't see that happening. And that's one of the reasons that we're having the conversation right now and why WEDA is moving in this direction, is because technically the guidance that was released in May only applied to the 2019-2020 school year. So the expectation for the 2021 years that we do move forward with both OSTP and WEDA assessment. But that's, kind of where we are. Christy, thanks for joining in. I appreciate your feedback. Thank you. So that's pretty much that. Anyone have any, I want to get people off the line here. Don't want to keep you any longer than you have to. Does anyone have any last minute comments or anything?
No, I was just going to say Ashley Cunningham is Union Public Schools, and since I'm retiring in June 2021, she's our coach.
Congratulations. All right.
I know, I'm so excited. What was I thinking? I should have done June 2020, but
your whole face brightened up when you said that.
So excited. But anyway, so Ashley's going to be on a lot of our meetings going forward.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, I will keep you guys posted about how this moves forward. I don't know exactly, WEDA wasn't exactly sure on what their timeline looks like after. I'm supposed to get the state feedback back to them tomorrow, and I don't know how fast after that their executive board is going to make a decision on whether or not to move forward or not. So we'll have to just kind of play it by ear, but as soon as I know something, I'll at least give you guys a heads up so you're not kind of sitting there in limbo. Sound like a plan? All right. Well, thanks again for everyone for joining me on such short notice. I genuinely appreciate it. And if you ever have any questions, feel free, reach out. I'm always here.
Thank you, Dan.
Not a problem. Gene, not Jennifer. Nice.
Jennifer may